Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Lawvere, and I'm joined with my co-host, Chris Crawford. Thank you for listening again to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Lawvere, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Crawford. And we have special guest Matt Collum from Collum Custom Knives. He's a custom slip joint maker, makes fixed blades, and it's an excavation. And Matt, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, Chris and I know you pretty well, but for the rest of the world who doesn't know your personal life so much, I mean, share what you want to, but what do you do for a living, family stuff, stuff like that?
All right. Well, I'm a superintendent over an excavation company. I do that full time. And between family and when I have time, I generally try to get out to the shop every day to build knives. I got one son, he's 13. I'm sorry, he's 14. And between that and church, it's about all I do.
That seems like a full-time job plus then, right? So what got you into knives? Can you talk a little bit about your history with them, what your first exposure was to knives?
Yeah, so when I was younger, my dad, he was in the military, and me and my brother, we lived with my grandfather, and he made pocket knives and did a lot of gunsmithing and stuff. So I think I was right about 12, first knife I ever made, which was a pocket knife. And kind of a funny story about it. We have been watching my grandpa, and he's been kind of teaching us, on how to make them. And me and my brother had the bright idea that we was going to make our first one. And we found some old rods out in one of the buildings, and we thought it'd be perfect for handles. So we made these knives and we're done with them. We went over and showed the grandfather. He's like, y'all did a good job. And he was smiling, but at the time we didn't realize what we had done. The next day we had got up and we used our knives a little bit, being young and excited about having something, especially something you made, And our hands was tore up. And we went out there and we was telling him our hands was all messed up. And he said, let me see your hands. And we showed him, and he asked to see our knives. Well, come to find out, we had used fiberglass rods, some old fiberglass rods. We got off a job for the handles. So I guess you would call it a shadow pattern. It was pretty much just a fiberglass rod on the handles, a spring, and a blade. And so that was my first account of making a knife. And the reason I did make them was because of him, seeing him do it and being interested in it. Which, too, that was a good while back. That was back in probably 1999.
So your granddad was already making knives when you were a little kid, and did he primarily make folding knives? Did he make them to sell, or what was his involvement with knife making?
He actually, it was mostly pocket knives. That's just pretty much all he done. He had been making them before we had come along, but really he made them and gave them to the family members and close friends. So I collect his knives. So if I know somebody that's got some of his knives, I buy them or build knives for them to get their knives, So he pretty much always made them. He didn't sell them. But we got to remember, too, you didn't have Facebook. And I'm sure my grandfather at the time wasn't aware of how big the knife community actually was. I know I didn't realize how big the knife community was until I later on decided back in 2019 to start back making knives. So most of his knives are circulated right here local.
What particular pattern? What was one of his patterns that he made?
Pretty much like the Buck 110, I believe. Well, like a lot of people, the Buck 110 was a popular knife, just for a cheap popular knife. So I noticed there is one pattern he built a lot, and as he as he continued making knives, you see where he tweaked that pattern and turned it into his own pattern. And then he made a case sodbuster, like a sodbuster pattern, and a 2-blade trapper.
That's cool that you had, you were exposed to the idea of knife making at such a young age. I think a lot of people now, a lot of kids are exposed to it just from, like the Forged in Fire show or whatever. But, I never even knew people were making knives themselves until I was an adult pretty much. And, but yeah, to have that exposure at such a young age, that's really interesting and really cool.
Well, yeah, and two, too, being young, your grandfather does something, you're like, oh man, I got the most awesome grandfather there is. He does this, as a kid's mentality. But it was at the time, I can honestly say I was interested in it off and on till I was probably about 20 or 21, maybe about 20. That was about the last time I made one with him. I made multiple knives growing up, and a funny story about one, and it was actually the pattern I started back building, and I haven't built it since I've swapped over to Collum custom knives, but I've actually built a good bit of them. But this particular pattern here was his evolution of the Buck 110. It becomes smaller, had more of a sway in the clip point. Overall, it's a great pattern. But I had built this knife. It was the last one I built. And when we was kids, what started is you didn't go to the store and buy a knife. My grandpa, he hated stainless steel because every time you bought a knife, it was junk. If it was it just didn't hold an edge. And, a lot of old timers, they wanted that high carbon. And so that's kind of how we knew if we needed a knife, we had to go make a knife. And the last one I made, I had a guy at a job. I've had that knife for about 4 years. I carried it every day, but I always knew. My grandfather said, you don't loan out your knife. Somebody will be over there digging out a nail with your knife or using it as a screwdriver. And we was on a job, and I loaned the knife to my buddy. And for like a year, I kept telling him, no, you need to buy you a knife, or I'd carry a cheap knife. And every time somebody wanted to borrow one, I'd let them use that. I wouldn't let them use the knife I made. And this knife, I forgot to get it back from him. And the next day, I was like, hey, I need my knife back. And he couldn't find it. It was gone.
Oh, no.
So this knife had actually got, prior to this event, it had actually gotten stolen from me. And I was in a store. And the store here local, a guy had bought it off another guy and had it in there in his display case for sale. And needless to say, I had to buy my old knife back for $5. So, it made me feel real great. First time somebody's ever bought my knife, I can honestly say I was the first one to buy my own knife at $5. I was really upset, but I bought my first knife. First knife that got sold. Somebody else collected the money, and I had to pay for it.
That's funny.
Yeah.
You saying that about not loaning your knife made me think about like when we have our family Christmas get-togethers for our gift opening. I always carry two knives. I carry my knife and then I carry a pass-around knife. So if somebody asks, because one year, not long after I started making knives, we were at one of them and somebody asked, does anybody have a knife? And I said, like, yeah, and hand them my pocket knife I'd made. And I look over there and they're about to try to take a screw out with it. I was like, hold on, you asked for a pocket, you asked for a knife, not a screwdriver. But you're right, man. That's the quickest way to come back with a blunt tip. But that is funny.
And most people don't realize the time, the craftsmanship that goes in a knife unless you are making a knife. So you might spend 10 to 15 hours building a knife, and you hand them a knife, they might think, oh, that's great. But then again, if they're type just buy any knife, use it as a screwdriver, they have no respect for it, And I got a motto I live by. There's three things you don't loan out. That's your wife, your knife, or your handgun. You keep them close. Yeah.
So Matt, 2019, you got started back into slip joints. Can you talk a little bit more about that and like what prompted that?
I've always kind of wanted to get into blacksmithing. It's still one of my goals, but what I did, I was sitting there, me and my wife, we actually watched Forge in the Fire, and I told her, I wanted to get into blacksmithing. More or less, I guess, work with like wrought iron and stuff. Nothing necessarily for knives. And I got to pricing some of this stuff, like just an anvil, and some of the prices, and I couldn't fathom me just spending all this money for a hobby out of our personal income through our work. And I had told my wife I think I was going to start back making pocket knives and try to sell a few to buy some blacksmithing tools.
Did you already have knife making equipment at that point?
No, I had nothing.
So that it didn't. How were you figuring on? I mean, it seems like you'd have an investment either way, right? With either blacksmithing or knife making.
Yeah, it was a big investment. I was actually, as I said, I was doing excavation for a living. I actually had my own trucking and excavation business that I did as well. I had got rid of that. Well, I found myself with free time at the house. And what I did, still to this day, I do the same thing. Guess I'm going on 3 years since I really can say, hey, I started making knives. Even though I originally made some when I was younger, all up to I was about 19 or 20. What I've done is every time a knife sells, that money strictly goes back to the knives. So the past 3 years of knife making, I've built my shop, expanded it, and bought all my tooling with strictly knife money. So at the time, my idea of a pocket knife, I had no idea, as I was saying earlier, how big the pocket knife world was. I didn't even know they had a blade show. So in 2019, I never even knew there was a blade show. I never knew you had all these guys that made these knives. And as I got started back into it, I just started looking at pocket knives on Facebook. And then I started noticing some people's names popping up. I started clicking on them. And then I started seeing these knives, and I realized that, there's a big market for pocket knives. And it kind of has grown from me. When I started back, I was selling pocket knives at $75 to where I am now.
You've come a long way in 3 years. I mean, I know you said you had a history, an older history with knives, but to really get back into it just 3 years ago, man, you've really come a long way. You come further in 3 years, and I probably come in 20.
Well, when I started back, some people might think it's crazy, but I come from a background where we had a 1x4. My grandfather had a 1x42 belt grinder. It was just a Craftsman. I actually still got it out there in my shop. It's right there. So there was no milling liners. We used 1/8 pin stop. We'd drill our hole with a 1/8 on our pivot, and we'd use a 3/16 drill bit in reverse to ream that hole just enough to swell that pin head in. So compared to the way I was taught, and it was great. I wouldn't change none of it. Because honestly, all them knives I can get my hands on, I snatch them up. So I collect all my grandfather's stuff. So it is my stepping stone. But compared to what I started back making them to how everybody's making knives now, it's a world of difference. And I can only imagine somebody that's been making knives for 20 years, 30 years. They started and stayed involved and helped promote it. And really, if a man's going to get into making knives, pocket knives especially today, and be involved with his fellow peers, he's really got to up his game. And one thing I noticed is there's people out there making knives that just blowed my mind. And it had almost got to where it's more of an obsession. I would see a knife that somebody made, and I was like, well, I got to be able to make that knife. And I'd have that in my mind that I needed to achieve that goal. And I kept learning. I do know this as well. Not every advice you get for making a knife works, you know. We all have our own ways of doing things, but I've had people intentionally tell me things, and I realize, hey, that's not the way you want to do it, you know. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you get better the more mistakes you make, and then you learn how to correct a mistake, because I think I've only made one good knife that just turned out great all the way through the whole working process. But I've learned how to, instead of throwing one in the trash, I've learned how can I fix this mess up, you know? So I feel strongly it's not how great of a knife we can make, it's how can I fix this boo-boo, you know? Can I make this knife good? Because we always run into problems.
Yeah, I was just talking to a guy, I guess he stopped by Sunday, and we had that same conversation, you know, and I told him that's one thing that he wasn't a new knife maker, but we were just on the subject, and I said, you know, one of the things that I do tell new knife makers is don't when you mess one up, don't just quit it and throw it away and start over. Keep going, finish it out, because, you know, part of it's just learning to make your mistakes. Sometimes the knife doesn't come out the way you started it out, and it still ends up being a really good knife. But, you know, stick with it, because it's kind of like a video game. You know, we used to play these video games, or my kids will play these video games, and it's one where as soon as you mess up, like, you start over and just, well, keep playing, because you need to play all the way through the round so you'll know what to expect. And kind of the same thing with knives. Even though you make a mistake, keep going till you get done, and then you're going to learn a lot more than if you just scrapped it and started over every time.
Right. Yeah. I think it builds a lot of character too, you know, but there was a time where I would just throw them away. So I'd be working on a knife and get to a point where I'm like, oh, there's no recovering from this. And now looking back, I say, man, if I had the ones I throwed away, or the ones I beat apart with a hammer, I could have saved them knives and made them knife. But I believe the more mistakes you make and you learn how to correct them mistakes, that's what produces you to be a better knife maker. It's not striving to make that perfect knife every time. It just don't work that way, because they are handmade, and the specs we're trying to meet now, it's, you know, you have flaws in them.
So something about that is, I guess, a little bit different methodology from what Chris was talking about. Is I you know, every knife that I make, there's some things that I know that I can wrap my head around fixing, but then there's just sometimes when you get a little bit stuck, and I will typically just throw those in a bin. I won't chuck them, but I'll throw them in a bin. And if I'm looking for something to do, I'll go through that and just see some of my previous work, and sometimes I'll eye a knife, and I'll you know, it's just I don't know, you just hit a time when you're ready to actually fix that mistake. And I can take a knife that was previously I thought was done for and rework it, or maybe change it into something a little bit different. And if it's not a fatal flaw, like a crack because of heat treating or quenching, or something that's messed up with the handle material or something, then usually I'll just, you know, fix it. But there is the concept of diminishing returns in knives too. Like, if you make a mistake and it takes you 20 hours to fix something that you could just go and replace by, you know, recutting it out and grinding it and everything, then you have to make that economical decision eventually. But, you know, I definitely think that there's a process of trial and error, mostly error, in just about every craft.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things I do, so I got one set of handles off a muskrat that I have nailed on my wall in front of my desk that I've messed up on. And it was due to a shrinkage of some well spine. And I have a side buster blade hammered in my wall. That way, every day I go out there and when I sit down at that desk to get started, I have to look at that and remind myself, you know, don't do this again. Because Could I take it off the wall and fix some of it? Yeah, I probably could, but I like to have that reminder. I know some people say they throw their parts in a box, but I just kind of like it to be right there in my face to remind me, don't do this again.
Yeah, so when you started making slip joints again, your first 100 knives were in homage to your grandfather, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So when I started back making knives, my grandfather had done passed away and everything. So I had actually went over to his shop, and I got some of his patterns. Well, I got every one of his patterns. And I was out there thinking I made one for my wife. I ended up having to take back, because it had went all them years without making a knife. I actually had cut we did some land clearing. I cut a poplar tree down. So I used the wood out of the poplar, and I had some of the green and the sapwood in there, so it was green and brown, green and white. Turned out really great, and it was like a little pen knife. That was the first one I made when I started back in 2019. I gave it to my wife. Well, I realized I had forgot to ream the holes, and I ended up taking it back. I still got it out there in desk. She asks about it all the time, but it's just there. Don't want to fix it because it's the first one I started back. It just reminds me of where I am now versus where I was. But I was out there thinking, I was looking at them patterns, and I was thinking, well, these are patterns that my grandfather had ended up being his patterns. He had moved away from, like I said earlier, the butt 110 to his own patterns. So I was out here and I started building his knives, and I got to thinking I would have built 100 of these in his name. So what I did is he was an old crane operator, and everybody called him DucLegs because the way he walked, his toes turned into each other. So everybody called him DucLegs, and I was thinking, well, I need to do something to kind of honor him. It kind of tells the history of where I started and kind of where I come from. So I decided to build 100 knives under the name of DucLeg. And I actually got it I'm trying to think of what you call that, where you get it through the state or whatever. What is it called? It's copyright. So I got DucLeg's copyrighted still to this day. But I made 100 of them, and my 100th one was all of them under DucLegs. And by the time I got to about 80, I started getting where I felt like I was doing pretty good. And the ball was really rolling real good. And I told myself, well, I can't continue to make them under this name. I need to have my name on there, my last name on there. And that's after that 100, I had switched over to Collum, which is Collum Custom Knives.
Matt, on those 100 that you were making, were you selling those, or what were you doing with them?
Yes, I was selling them. So it started out, I was selling them to people that knew me, a lot of people that knew the family. They knew that my grandfather made knives. They knew me and my brother had actually made knives, and but I had went a long time without making no more. When I got started back making them, I started kind of posting them on Facebook and stuff, and it kind of just got a lot of attention. And a lot of I'd say the first 40 was definitely just people wanting to support me. I wouldn't have nothing. That's one thing I realized, if it wasn't for the people. We can make whatever we want, we can do whatever we want, but if ultimately people ain't buying and supporting, you can't make a knife. You might make one here and there, but you're not going to make a bunch of knives, and you're not going to be able to do it and make money at it, because it is expensive. If it's going to be a hobby, it's a pretty expensive hobby. So I was selling them to a lot of people I knew, and then it got to where other people was telling people about that, and then they was buying them. And before I knew it, I was overwhelmed. And then I made the announcement, that I would be discontinuing the DucLeg brand and moving over to Collum Custom Knives. And then it's like when I done that, a bunch of people was jumping in line, and at the time I had no idea really about how to take orders and stuff, and I was so far backed up that I think I made about another 100 knives under Collum before I was ever called up. And I'm pretty much where I am today. I'm obviously still behind, but still trying to catch up. I guess it's it's a good thing to have, but it's a process too, considering I work full time and then trying to make knives and raise a family, you know.
Yeah, and one thing that's interesting, I think I got introduced to you through social media because you had sold some like larger blocks of micarta. I don't know whether it was like through the grapevine or whatever, that there was some older vintage stuff, like I don't know, like maybe some like butterscotch micarta or something like that. And so I've pretty much been following you since you've been in knives, but I don't think that we really became friends online until I started working with you on your website and everything, which that's kind of like where I got to really know more about the DucLeg story and more about you. So I think if anyone has a takeaway from this episode, other than just getting to know you more, it's that every progression of an artist or a craftsman's like life in that craft is different, but you're really only limited by your imagination and really the support system that you have behind you. So it's actually been really cool, Matt, to see you progress over the years, because you know, like where you've come from with your first few DucLeg knives, getting back into it, and the quality and the tolerance that you're meeting now are quite a bit different. And if anybody wants to actually look at that and show just like an exponential like maturity and growth in making knives, just look at, you know, past posts or things like that you have, because I mean it's pretty incredible, like the work that you're doing now versus when you started back up and you're getting your legs back under you.
Right. You know, and as you had said, you know, when I was building under DucLeg, I was kind of still more, I guess you'd say local. I don't even think I found out about some of the groups most of us are in, knife makers like the Custom, Slipjoint, and making lockbacks and stuff. I didn't figure out about that till pretty much, I believe I was already moved over into the Collum side. So I know I kind of just popped up out of nowhere on the social media side. So a lot of people don't know the history, I guess, of the first 100 I did under another name, you know?
Yeah, but that doesn't seem to have hurt you too bad. I mean, I noticed in fixed blades, I spent a lot of time doing like research and development and prototyping and things before I started selling a lot. And then I started, you know, getting my knives photographed and was popping up in publication and stuff. And I will say that for me, like the sales side of knives was a lot slower, but you know, it's good to see examples like yours where you can pop up and you start really building a lot of momentum in the new collector market and everything, because that's a really difficult transition to make, like going from being a no recognition type of name to actually having people you know, share your work on social media and stuff and collect them actively and want to be on your books and, you know, keep aware of what you're doing. So, you know, you're a good use case for that as well.
Yeah. You know, I just have a mindset where it's like, you know, some people ask me, and, you know, I'm still learning in the process of how everything works too, you know, but, like I tell some of the guys that ask me, I say, just make the knife. If somebody don't buy it, you know, if you're not, I do believe that you have to be producing knives. Because I look at it as not only is somebody buying a knife from me, but they're buying my name, you know, and to me, the most valuable thing that we can put in a knife is our time. You know, that's something we never get back. So far, I haven't had a comeback on a knife, but I know that day's coming. it's just a matter of time. But I'll gladly take it back, pay the full refund and either make them a new knife or fix the one they have. But I do believe you got to have a mentality where you're just going to make knives. You have to get out there and make them, because I know if I was a collector and I was buying from a guy, I'd want to be buying from a guy that's producing knives. Because I don't want to buy a few knives off a guy and then he's done making knives,
That's something that I don't know if we've really touched a lot on that yet, but in the collector market, especially, you have collectors who are speculative collectors, right? So they look at a maker and they'll follow their career for a while. And if that maker washes out, makes some really good knives, but for a short period of time, and they don't do anything else in knives, they won't even touch them as a collector because they'll be more than happy to put money down on your product. But if they feel that that's not going to at least be as valuable, 6 months, a few years from the time that they purchase it, and they can get their money back on the secondary market, then they won't even buy from you. But then the other type of collector is as a supporting collector, right? So they see your work, they see the trajectory, and they want to help you along. So I'm not going to say that they're like pity purchases, but if somebody really believes in what you're doing and they like you as a person and everything, and they like where you're going, they'll buy your product because they want to help support you and get you to that next level. But that does require you actually making things to prove to them that investment was wise, if that makes sense.
Yes, and too, as a knife maker, if anybody's going to make knives, and I do believe every knife maker starts out locally, and you price yourself out local. I mean, it gets to where, as you were saying, you have to support collectors. You eventually you're priced out locally. I try to produce a knife, but every knife I make, I spend time on that knife. I'm not worried about how fast I can produce a knife, but how good I can produce a knife, because it don't matter if I'm selling to somebody in France, if I'm selling to somebody in Europe, if I'm selling to somebody right here at the house. I want that knife to be just as nice as it's a knife that I'm willing to take to a show and show off. That individual, if he feels he's received his money's worth, he's going to buy more, or he's going to tell somebody about you. So that's one mentality I've always had is, all my scratches run one way, making it the best I can. There's been times that my great support would be my wife. I'd come in and show my wife, and if you don't want an honest answer, don't ever ask her what you think about the knife you just made, because there's many times she'd point something out, and I knew in my stomach, just, it could be something so small and so minute that most people wouldn't notice, but she would tell me, and it would bother me so bad. I many times I'd go back out to the shop and break that knife apart and redo it. But having a support system too to push you to continue to make the best product you can make, I think that's where it helps you along the way, but also it lets a customer know that you take pride in what you make and you're just not out there beating something together trying to make $1.
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake I make is when I ask my wife for her honest opinion on what I do. It's funny because I make a fixed blade that I'm really proud of, right? I mean, just everything that I put into it, I try to make them all professional photograph worthy. And one time I asked my wife, because I would make the sheaths too, because I didn't parts that out or anything. I was like, what do you think about like the entire thing? And she's like, honestly, Aaron, like your sheaths could do a lot of work. She says, you have really nice knives, but if you're, putting them in those sheaths, like she made a face, and I was like, oh man, I kind of got a little bit like upset. And I was like, what are you talking about? And it took a little bit of bickering, and then a little, quite a bit of introspection. I was like, you know what, she's right. And I don't have a problem with admitting that she's right, because it's happened so often. Yeah. But really, whether it's fixed blades or whether it's how you're setting up your pocket knives or things like that, it's the entire package, right? That starts
Yes.
with the knife that you make, but it also goes into whether you're putting it in a zipper case or whether you're like your certificate of authenticity, how you package it, and like everything. If you take pride in that and you make it the best that you can, that really means a lot, because that it's that wow factor when you open it and you see everything that's in its place, and it gives you that, I don't know, rather than having buyer's remorse, you're actually elated to have that thing and to spend the money on it.
Yes, it's like, have you ever seen that really beautiful fixed blade that's just in a sheath that shouldn't be in? And that's my deal with fixed blades. I like them, and there's some great fixed blade makers out there. I think I've made maybe 7 fixed blades, period. But I know that if I make a fixed blade, I have to make let me take that back. I've probably made 11, because I did post some on my website, some small ones and a big one. But the thing about a fixed blade is you've got to have a sheath. And I'm not willing to invest the time into being a good sheath maker. There's some knife makers that should be sheath makers, and there's some sheath makers that should continue to making sheaths. I mean, they're just really, really good at it. And I believe sheath making itself is just like in knife making. There's people that's really good at it. And so I guess that's why I continue to really stay away from fixed blades, because if the whole package ain't great, then you got a problem there,
Yeah, it's also the time commitment. I mean,
Yeah.
I've gone through the journey of trying to make good sheaths, and there's something about like cutting it out. Like the stitching and stuff is not as much of an issue, but you got to punch the holes in it. You got to cut it out right. It has to fit the knife well. And I didn't actually get to a place where I'm proud of my sheaths until I actually got a laser cutter. Now I could cut them out based on pattern. They were starting to look pretty good, but the pivot for me was if I can laser out the veg tan leather and get all of the proportions correct and then stitch it all from there, it made it a lot easier for me. But the investment for a laser, because I was using it for other things, wasn't as much of an issue. But somebody can't just walk into buying like a diode laser or something and spend $1,800, and try to make an economical purchase that way. Like, so, I mean, if somebody's making fixed blades and they're not really great sheath makers, there are quite a few like artisan sheath makers that make really good sheaths that you can buy them from, $35 to $85. And if that works in your price range and everything, you just send the knife out and they'll make the sheaths for you and send it all back to you. And you can, parts that out where you don't have to worry as much about the time and skill set investment for producing fixed blades. So it's not a deal breaker, but you got to think, you got to like swallow your pride a little bit. If you're not good at that, you got to say, okay, who else can do that that's better, and is it economical?
Right. And I guess one of the perks for me is there for a while I was turning down, or I would not build them when people would ask, because there's a large customer base for fixed blades. But my son has gotten involved, so now when somebody wants me to make a fixed blade, I'll just tell them, that I'm not going to be able to make it, but I can have my son would be glad to make it. And so if he stays involved with it, that's something he can pick up the slack on my end. It's one of the worst things though is when he finishes the knife and he's like, "Dad, we got to make a sheath. Can you help me?" So that's the one thing I dread. I mean, I enjoy doing it with him, but it's the sheath, because you done finished the knife and everything, but now you need to build the sheath,
If you don't watch out, your wife and son are going to be outperforming you on making knives and everything, because both of them are real talented when it comes to making them and finishing them out.
Yes, I've had other knife makers joke with me and tell me that I need to paint the grinders pink and stuff for my wife, and then give my shop over to my son. But it's great when the family gets out there and gets involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember that when I got voting status in the guild, you had applied. So you're currently a probationary member, going for voting member status this year, right?
Yes, sir. I'll be going in for voting status in Texas, the ICCE show. I think it's next month. Yeah.
Yeah, March already. And what other type of projects do you have going right now? I mean, I know that you've been doing these large batches of muskrats, but talk a little bit about the muskrat pattern itself, and then kind of what you got going on with doing some bulk order stuff.
Okay. So I don't know, maybe about 8 months back, I got into a kick of wanting to do multi-blades. So I had got to where there's a lot of patterns that I've made. There's a lot of knives that are my own pattern that I make, and I'll take some patterns and put my blades in them. But I guess what got me started in where I'm at right now is I had done a 2-blade trapper with my rattler blades, and I moved from that. I still make that, but I've also moved into a muskrat pattern, which is my own pattern. And surprisingly, that knife has been pretty popular for me, and been building a lot of them. Well, now I've gotten to the point to where I am just about burnt out on building a muskrat. Hollinger, he's not too far from me. He's down south. He jokes around. Y'all see sometimes on social media, he'll put muskrat Matt, because I've been making so many muskrats.
I like that.
Yeah. So I there for a while, I jumped off the muskrats, and I did a split back whittler just to try it. Turned out great. And, I got from that to having to build a batch order for a guy down in Florida. And that's what I'm currently building. I'm still building these muskrats now for this guy. And then I got to get to building some for this show. But right now, currently, too, I kind of got interested in building a 1143, a Remington 1143. So I'm in the process of building that pattern right now to be able to produce that knife.
So what's the intention for like Collum custom knives in the future? Are you going to continue to focus mostly on your own patterns, or with this Remington model, are you looking at trying to get more into the traditional patterns and that like the pattern provenance that I've talked about, where it's like, it's exact replicas of old patterns?
Well, as you said earlier, you had probably met me through some micarta and stuff. So there for a while, I was building a lot of knives where I could throw a lot of micarta on. But when I started originally making knives when I was a kid, we made knives out of natural material. That's something I'm always drawn back to. But I can say with natural material, you have so many problems that pop up with natural material versus micarta. So I'm moving back in the steps where I'm kind of sick and tired of messing with it, the micarta side. But I'm definitely going to keep my patterns, keep my personal patterns going. But I am moving towards the side where I want to bring back knife patterns. There's a lot of knife patterns that people just ain't building, not many of. So I would like to be able to produce knives, the traditional patterns, but also as well keeping my personal patterns going too.
Yeah, I don't think micarta and G10 are really stable materials to work with, but yes. I don't think a lot of people know like how they used to manufacture micarta and how like carcinogenic it is. So I mean, you're using with phenolic resins, it's like formaldehyde based, right? And a lot of them would put like for the fibers, they would also put asbestos and things like that in it. So if you get them, depending on where you get it from and depending on how old it is, you can actually have both the formaldehyde and the asbestos in there. And that's also not really great for the lungs or to be laying around in your shop.
And that was one of the issues, because you do have to look and try to figure out what you're working with. You can't just buy any micarta and say, hey, I'm going to use this. You can. I don't know how long you're going to be able to do it for, but one of the issues I had is I have to keep my shop clean. I can't stand stepping on stuff. I don't like having grit in the floor. So my most used and prized tool is my broom. People make fun of me for that too, but I'm always sweeping. So what I had to do is I built a shop addition, and I've added a big fan in this room. So if I'm grinding micarta or something, I can flip that switch on and all the dust is instantly out. But it is like riding a motorcycle with no fairing on and no helmet. But I'm not having all that dust and breathing it in from the micarta.
Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes to carbon fiber, well, there's something that I appreciate about some knife makers, and it's that PPE has always been like a thing that they talk about, because you only have one set of lungs and only one pair of eyes, right? But especially like I come from like coal mining country, and so black lung was a big deal, and it's all the carbon buildup in your lungs from mining coal. But then if you're doing any type of work with a limestone or other silica-based things, it's a silicosis or white lung, right? Yeah. So when you're grinding metal, you can get silicosis, and things like carbon fiber, G10, and micarta have very fine fibers that they sit inside of your lungs. But the problem is that your lungs can't process them like some other contaminants. So they just sit in there for forever, and then they start blocking up your alveoli, which are the oxygen exchange components of your lung. And then you end up later on in life with like emphysema, you get pneumonia a lot easier and things like that. So, it's not only like wear your respirator, not just a dust mask, wear your respirator and clear those fibers out, because, the wind blows and you start breathing it in without a mask, you don't realize it. And then you can start getting these breathing issues. It's kind of dangerous stuff.
Without a doubt.
So, how do you handle having a backlog of orders and then balancing that out with what you want to build, and then also preparing for shows? Can you talk a little bit about what shop management and order management looks like in your shop?
So the show side, I'm still learning the show side. I've only done 2 shows. Last year I did a show in Atlanta and a show I'll take that back. I've done 3 shows. I've done a show in Atlanta, I've done a show in Birmingham, and I've done a show in Arkansas. So the show side I'm still working on. I think I probably do pretty much like all the knife makers do. Oh man, here's a show. I got to start building knives for this show. But you got to keep your orders going out. So what works for me is if somebody wants me to build them a knife, I tell them how far out I am, and I would contact them before I start the knife, make sure they're still on page, because 6 to 8 to 9 months down the road, a lot could happen in an individual's life. So I try to message them and say, hey, I'm fixing to start your knife. Are we still good to go? And if they say yeah, then I know, okay, I'm going to build the knife. So what I try to do is, if I want to build something I'm interested in, and that's the thing for a knife maker, the best way to get a knife maker motivated in making a knife is get them interested in something. So like today, I have all these knives going on, and I'm having to get built, and I got to get this order filled, and I got to get knives made for this show. But I wanted to build this pattern, and I thought to myself when I was building it, man, I'm excited about building this pattern. So here I am, I'm getting it, and it kind of moved me on through the process of the knives I'm working on. So what I try to do, if it's a knife that another pattern that I'm wanting to produce to put out there, or when I'm wanting to build for a show, I'll spend maybe an hour or 2 on it after I get where I need to be on my orders for the day. So I might find myself just a few hours a day working on something that I'm interested in versus dedicating 100% time. I try to break it down just a little bit, a couple days a week, where I can work on something I want to work on to keep me interested and motivated.
That's good advice. So if there's one thing that you could advise new knife makers on, just as like a words of wisdom or whatever, what would it be?
I would have to say, don't go cheap um, in your tooling. If you see there's a need that you might need to buy a disc lender or a horizontal or a surface grinder or a mill, don't just go buy something that you think is going to get you by. Keep working at it and save up to where you can get something that's going to work right. Because I can honestly say, where I had started back making knives, I went and bought the basic tool and just cheap. I went to Harbor Freight, like a lot of people probably did, and I noticed that if I would have never spent the money on some of these tools, I could have been further ahead of where I am now versus buying the right tools for the job. Not to compromise. And I guess the other thing would be is to don't worry about making a mistake. Just learn how to correct that mistake and don't give up on it. And continue making knives, whether they sell or not. If you can afford to keep making them, keep making them. Somebody out there will buy. There's a lot of people in this world,
Yeah, what's the adage is buy once, cry once, right?
Yeah, because there's a lot of things I have bought, and I turn around and end up giving it away to somebody. Like, there's a lot of tools I bought I gave to my brother for woodworking. I'm like, here, man, take this. I can't use it. Or I hide it for my wife. I might stuff it off in a camper or something. That was a bad investment. So yeah, best thing to do is and honestly, definitely learning how to work your tools, use your tools to the best of your ability. A lot of our tools are way further ahead than we are, but learn how to work your tools. But two, knowing that if you find yourself compromising and saying, well, I can get this and this, it's like buying a grinder without variable speed control. Can you grind a blade on it? Sure you can. Are you going to be able to produce a good product? It's going to be safe for you to work. I mean, all that matters, especially if you're serious about making knives. It's best to get what you need.
Yeah, that's a point with variable speed that I don't know that a lot of people think about. So in the military, they say slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes the difference between a very quick and abrupt mistake that you really can't come back from and successfully pulling off a build is being able to address it slowly, right? And if your grinders especially are going 90-0 and you don't have the opportunity to slow down, then you can compound a lot of mistakes that might have been easier to fix. So, like, for instance, if I'm doing grip progressions on bevels, and this, fixed blades with a little bit more material to remove than slip joints, when I'm removing material with a low grit belt, that's fine. But as I start progressing up the grits, and I'm moving on to like aluminum oxide, I will slow that grinder down substantially in order to get a finished grind. And I can massage out low grit scratches and stuff a lot easier and see what I'm doing versus just blowing and going and end up ruining something on the last 10% for getting things finished.
Yeah, the finish up is the finish of a knife is everything in knife making. You can do everything great and then get to the finish up and just have poor quality finish up, and you've wasted all that time. So, like you're saying, slowing down and using your machines proper, it's big, because you can be doing something in the initial start that defects that knife all the way through finished product that you just can't recover from. And also, what you asked me earlier about if I had any advice, I do have one pretty important thing, and it's something I did. I know it kind of might sound the best, but start paying attention to when knife makers post a picture of their work. If you see tooling in their shop, try to understand what they're using that tooling from. And I say that from a background of somebody that came from a drill press and a 1x42. And, when I started, we was taking burnt Delo diesel oil, and we was using old sawmill blades, and it had to be burnt motor oil, and we would quench that steel in it, and it was just right. It had a decent hardness for a blade, but the spring temper, you barely had to glue it back, and it worked out great. But coming from that background to realizing how big the knife community is, how many knife makers are out there, I would look at pictures. If I seen somebody and I seen their work and I knew they was producing quality work, and these people, I still look at their work and I say, man, I got to be like that or be better. You know, everybody wants to be the best knife maker out there. But I would look in the background of their pictures and I would try to see their tooling and try to say, okay, I see what they're doing with that, you know. So really paying attention, you know, and I know my shop is nowhere near where I want it to be. I would love to have a grinder for each grit, you know, each grit sandpaper. I don't even want to swap sandpaper belts out, but paying attention to what other knife makers have has helped me out a lot too.
Yeah, well, thanks for disclosing that to everybody. Now we're going knife makers.
Y'all better start.
Knife makers are now going to like hide everything and just like do finished photos. We won't be able to perform espionage.
Yeah, well, there's actually some knife makers, and they know what I'm saying. They post a picture, a work in progress. There is some things they don't let you see, and there's times that I try to take my pictures where it shows some little tools, just some simple little things that make the project go so much easier. Might not understand what it is, but if you see that enough, you're going to start questioning it. You know, I get a lot of comments because I like to post a lot on my story, Instagram and Facebook as I'm going. So people can kind of see what I'm doing as every day in the shop. But sometimes I take these pictures where it shows certain tooling and what I'm doing in the steps and how I'm kind of going about doing it. So I have a lot of knife makers. They'll message me, you know, people starting out, and they'll message me and say, hey, I appreciate all these pictures. I've learned a good bit from just watching you. I'm like, well, okay, if I can help you, let me know, you know. And they'll ask me questions about certain tools. Now, there is some things that I won't share. You know, that's something that somebody needs to invest time and learn. But I'm not the only one like that. And there's a lot of guys out there that do the very same thing, you know.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between building your own tooling and things that are proprietary, and then building things that are kind of common knowledge, right? So like rise and fall indicators, or you know how you're peening your work or things like that. You know, doing like integral liners or integral bolsters and things like that. I mean, those are all fairly common, but it's not like there's a knife maker who has like some special tool or jig or something like that. They spend a lot of trial and error trying to develop, and you're entitled to that. Like that is their work, and that's what they call PI is like proprietary information. So don't expect that every knife maker is just going to give up all the goods, because there are some things that, you know, that they strongly invest in, and it's worth them keeping it to themselves, because I mean, you know, that somebody else can clone that and start selling it on the market and undercut them, or, you know, things of that nature. So it's not necessarily something that you should take offense at, but just realize that, you know, there's common knowledge, and then there's proprietary information, and there is a difference, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to run a business too. If you're selling knives to either make a living or to grow your shop and improve your lives.
Yes, but you know, I want to say this too while we're on this subject. Knife making is hard enough. You look at the market you're I don't want to say necessarily competing with, because the market is so big and there's so many buyers out there, but the knife makers that you're going up against, you have to really, really produce stuff. And 90% of the time, if you'll reach out to another knife maker, they'll get you ahead of where you was before you made a phone call or you sent that message most of the time. And while we're on the subject, it's like peening bolsters and hiding pins. That's one thing that I see a lot of people it's almost like some people it's a magic trick, So if y'all don't mind, I want to give a tip on peening bolsters where they can be hit. Be a tip of the day. So it ain't so much the peening process as it is the prep process to get there. I've seen where guys, and listen, they might do it this way and it works for them. I can tell you from a guy that went from putting a oversized drill bit in reverse, reaming a hole and peening pins to trying to figure out how to hide a pin. And I've learned it is the reaming process. Some guys, they squish them with a vise. Some guys beat them with a hammer. I have a claw hammer out there that I use. I have a flat, cheap little hammer I bought from Woodcraft. I think it's 4 ounces, and it's super light. I'll peen it with that, or I'll peen it with a chasing hammer. I'll hit it with any hammer I can get my hands on, longer than a waffle cone hammer. So a little tip is, don't so much get caught up into all these extra steps. Start looking at what you're doing and try to understand what that knife is doing. One of the biggest issues with people trying to hide pins is they ream too deep, and when they pin their knife together, whether they break it in after they've peened it, they've sanded the heads off or before, which they should break it in after, that pivot pin is actually moving on them. Whether it's just a thousandths or whatever it is, that pin is moving on because their hole is so deep on their ring that they're not able to swell that pin into the cavity. So a lot of times your pinning process ain't what messed you up. It's how you reamed your hole. You reamed your hole too deep. Just ream it, get a burr, a simple deburring bit, 1/8 deburring bit that cones down to a 1/16. That's what I use, and it works perfect. Just ream it till you get a little burr on it, and then peen that thing together.
Yeah, kind of on that note, I think it's important, based on something that you said, that people realize when you have a process like hiding pins, there are fundamental mechanisms for how to move metal or manipulate materials in order to get it to do what you want to do, right? And if you will stop and think about the issue, think about the technique, you can usually deduce how to do things if you think hard enough about it. For instance, like peening, the one issue is reaming them too deep, right?
That's a major issue.
Yeah. I mean, the other issue too is so what if you ream everything properly, but you're beating on it until that thing is almost beat to death and your knife locks up, right?
Well, go ahead.
Well, the reality is that there are times when you will encounter issues because you're trying to fix a problem or foolproof a process, and you end up hurting yourself more than you should. So if you take a step back and just think through the process, it's usually a little bit easier to find the solution.
Yes. And to remember, everything besides that blade and your scale material is malleable. You're able to push that material. So if anybody really thinks about what I'm saying, with just hiding a pin, you're pushing that material up tight against another material. That goes a long ways in the whole knife building process. I mean, just knowing that you're working with a malleable material, there's a lot of problems you can correct. I mean, from going from a blade out of square to anything. But, if there's been times I've peened blades, gotten mad and just peened it so much that trying to break it in, the pin was so hot it almost would burn my finger. But then I had to learn how to slack a blade. So I guess from, as you're saying, paying attention to what you're doing, understanding what you're working with, but also knowing that there's another step to take to correct an issue that you might have made trying to fix an issue. A lot of times we run into issues when we try to address the issue. Now we got 3 other issues to address.
Yeah, diminishing returns. Because it's like when you're doing bolsters, if you will take the step of contouring your bolsters before you even put handle material on, you can escape getting dips in your handle material because your metal is going to grind at a different speed and pressure than your handle material is. And
right.
if you will simply contour your bolsters out and then peen your pins, then you can do a pretty quick deburring and pop that pin in and swell it out. And you don't have to worry about whether, a few thousandths down, you have a gap. And then as soon as you grind it down, then your pin's exposed again.
Yeah. And, everybody has their own process. I started with shaping my bolsters before I put my handle material in there. And now I will not shape a bolster until my handle material is glued. But I have to factor in the fact of, hey, I don't want to get into my handle material. But two, there's a time to use a slack belt and there's time not to use a slack belt, But I guess in time and what you're making, it's a growing experience. I'm learning something every day I go out there. But it all goes back down to having the right tools and buying what you need and doing things slow and paying attention.
Yeah, and understanding your process, right? Because you could have 100 knife makers making the same exact pattern with the same exact handle material and steel and everything, and they're going to do it different ways. And if it doesn't make sense in your mind, like how you process the process, then you're not going to be able to execute it very well. And the only way to get around that is like a learning experience, so that trial and error, mostly error, right? So like I contour my bolsters before I ever put scale material on. But I'm sure that I can think of probably a half dozen reasons why you would also not contour your bolsters at all. So everybody has their process, and you got to figure out what works for you. And it might not be something that is even common practice, but if it gets you to the finish line, you just have to accept that's part of the creative process, right?
Without a doubt, yes. What works for me might not work for you, or what works for you might not work for me. I know there was a time a guy told me, do this. And I went over and done that. I was thinking, I'll never listen to that guy again. And come to find out, he was right. Here I am doing it the way he did it. He told me a long time ago, but at the time, I didn't have the knowledge and the understanding to fully, even though I understood, I did not truly understand his mentality, the way he thought about it. Now I can look at something and say, oh, yeah, I'm fixing to go over here, and I done got all my scales on these knives, and my bolsters ain't even shaped. So I already know in my mind how many thousandths is coming out of the back of that bolster versus to the tip of that bolster. And I've shaped my bolsters right there on the wheel, where with my scale material on there. And before I tried it, I had gapped up my scale material. I was so upset, but the problem wasn't the process. The problem was me not being ready for that step, so that's why I say what works for some might not work for others, but eventually they'll get to a point where what might not have used to work for them is the best way for them to do that now,
Absolutely. Chris, do you have any questions?
No, I'm just enjoying the conversation. And, I listen to these guys, and it really challenges me in thinking about, because I think we've talked about this. I pretty much make a standard pattern because it's easy and I enjoy it. And I don't really stretch myself. But, after listening to Matt and Stanley last week and stuff, I think maybe I need to try some different things. But I've just been enjoying the conversation.
Yeah, knife making is like a marriage. Like you have to sometimes mix it up in order to keep the love alive.
Well, and it goes back to what Stanley was saying, and I think Matt touched on this a little bit too, is you got to enjoy, I remember Stanley saying that, if you don't have a passion, and this may not be how he said it, but, if you go to the shop and you're just out there and you don't really want to be in the shop, don't be trying to make a knife, And what Matt was saying is, even though he's got his orders, he has these other projects going on, and he'll try to spend a hour or so on those, and those are things that he really wants to make. And I can see that as motivation for growth, growth in the type of knives you make, and just getting better, in general. And so, yeah, I think that's some good advice.
Yeah. And like you just said about if you're not feeling too motivated or interested in making a knife, there's days that I'll go out to the shop, I'll look at this knife, and I'll be like, ain't no way. And I'll find myself saying, like, I just got a lathe. Worst time, it's like every time I'm under the gun, here comes this tool, and it's perfect. It's everything I wanted right at the time. You never got enough, but so you get it, and then you're like, well, I don't even want to make a knife. So here I am over here scrubbing a machine down, polishing it, and trying to get it suited for my shop because I don't want to bring a filthy machine in my shop. It's going to be cleaned up, So I might find myself out there wiping everything down with WD-40 cleaning wave. And, there was a time just a few days ago, I didn't even want to make a knife. So I broke a old South Bend lathe apart and redone it. And so there is a time not to make a knife for a knife maker. There's time to take a break, because you do spend a lot of time in there, and you can easily get burnt out.
Yeah, something kind of on that note, and I think that life is about cross discipline, right? Like you do things. So I take this as like you work in excavation and you work with big machinery, right?
Right.
And there is a process that you go through when you're operating this machine, certain safety considerations, there's parameters that you have to follow for every job that you're going to do. And when you do those things correctly, you get the job done on time, in scope, and within the budget, right? And when I was playing violin when I was younger, I would get burned out because I'd have lessons sometimes with two teachers because they taught different disciplines. I would be in symphony orchestra, I'd be in chamber orchestra. I would have a fairly full schedule for performances. And man, when it got down to it, I would get just burned out. Either you're playing the same stuff over and over again, or even trying to learn new stuff was just a pain. And sometimes I would take a summer off. I would just I wouldn't even touch my fiddle at all. And I found that if I gave it enough time, I would start hearing the little, the little whisper, like it was calling me again and saying, hey, come and play me and let's do something different. And it would revitalize that passion for me. And that's what I try to do with making knives. Because my time management with working full time and taking care of my family, because we have some medical stuff that kind of keeps us in check when it comes to time balance. I'll find myself if I'm coming out into the shop and I don't know what to do, then I'll just lay off of it for a while. And then when I'm coming back, I'm usually busting things out and I come back strong. And it's not that I am disenchanted by making knives, it's just that I had more time, or the context is not right for how I'm able to make what I'm making. So sometimes taking a break and stepping away, or in Matt's case, cleaning in the shop, is a good way to break it up and keep it interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's a struggle, especially for the younger generation. And I would consider us the younger generation knife makers. There's knife makers out there, their kids are grown and they have grandkids. And one thing about Chris, he don't know it, but I respect him for it. And there's another fella, one of my buddies, Hollinger. I find myself at times, I'm thinking, man, I'm in the shop again today. This is the 20th day straight, and I think, here I am at this age, and my wife and I have a young son. It's a struggle of saying, okay, I need to sit this down and have family time. I need to spend time with my family, because there's going to be a day that I'll have more time, if the Lord permits, for me to live, be old enough. My son's going to be grown. He's going to have his own life, and I can devote more time. So for a young maker, I think that's a real struggle. Let me say that for a young maker with a family. One of the things that, like Chris, there's been times I talk to Chris, and Chris says, hey, we got sports and all this coming up, it's probably this month or this month for I can do this for you or something, And that's one thing that it always daunts in my head. I'll be out there, and I got a window right there where I can see the house because my shop's in the backyard. And that's one thing I think, oh man, I could be in there doing this for my family. So I guess what I'm saying is, even for a customer that's buying a knife, they might know that it's a lot of work, but mentally, and the time that it takes to get out there and get to where you are building knives. So that's one thing that I'd have to say that I struggle with at times, because I do make it to all my son's sports events and does all these things. But there's also, I need to be spending more time with him, because there's coming a day where he's going to be out of the house, and I'm going to be out here in this shop with all this time on my hands still making knives when I could have spent a little more time. It's a struggle.
Yeah. Well, you said earlier, time is the most valuable component towards knives. And I don't think a lot of customers, I don't even think a lot of people, whether it's your extended family or friends or things like that, realize you only have one life, right? I mean, it's a linear progression from birth till death, and you only have so many hours, so many days, so many years. And that also is with your family. So when my daughter was born with a congenital heart defect, right? And I mentioned this on my interview, she was doing pretty well, but the thing that's always stared us in the face as a family is mortality, because I've watched her almost die more times than I would like to admit, but it's a lot. And then when she was in the fixing to get out of the hospital, my stepson died in a motorcycle accident, right? And there is something incredibly sobering about regrets, things that you can't take back, and time not spent. And one thing that I will not sacrifice is the ability to spend time with my family for the sake of anything else. And if my day job can't support that, I'll find another job. I've done it before. If knives are something that God calls me to hang up because it's distracting me from my family to the point where it's becoming, it's becoming an addiction, or it's becoming an encumbrance for the way that I feel I need to be raising my family, then I'll give it up. And that's not to say that there's ever been a situation, even with all the chaos and tragedy in my life, that I've ever stepped away from knives. But it is important to lay out your time and to value it, and to really think, what are you sacrificing, and how are you prioritizing your life? And if that's not with the people that you love, and if that's not a good portion for yourself and recuperation and rest, then I feel like it's time wasted.
Yes, without a doubt. It's real important for a man to understand what is valuable in his life. And as you're saying, I truly feel for you for what you've been through. But you said something about regret. Regret's something it don't really bother you until you've already regretted it. There was a day, I was just talking with Stanley about this the other day. My wife came out there and said, "Hey, you want to go to the movies?" I was like, "Yeah, let's go. I'm tired of being in the shop. Let's go spend some time with my wife," And to me, it was funny because, she come out there and asked me let's go do something. So I was game for it. I was working on a knife. I threw the knife up on the counter. And I know better. I should have clamped that knife down flat. And, we left, went to the movies, and I was thinking, I just abandoned what I was doing to go with my family because that's more important. And I knew what was going to happen. And the next day I got to that shop, and that thing was curled up like a banana, and all I could do was laugh. But I can tell you this, I didn't regret going and spending time with my family. So, regrets is something that weighs a lot on people. But realizing what's valuable in our life is very important,
Yeah. As a maker, like when you're gone and you hang up your hat or you pass or whatever, there's always going to be somebody who's going to try to talk to your kin to get your stuff for pennies on the dollar. Right. So it's better to invest your time and energy in things that have longevity. And, knives and material and things like that are great, but that's all ephemeral, right?
Temporary. Yeah.
So
my son. One thing I realized is, which my son's still young. I remember being his age. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I told him, I said, son, you'd be a way better knife maker than me if you got out here and learned. I said, you'd be way ahead. But he's told me there's times that he's going to sell everything and turn it into a barbershop. But I'm okay with that. I do need to label all the McCart out there, because if he can get the right deal, he can make a lot of money to pay for his barbershop. But that's life, and that's stuff that I wanted. I'm not going to be the type to expect my son to follow my steps. If he chooses to do that, that's great. If he chooses not, I'm even just as happy for him, because I can honestly say, when I was a kid, I never would have thought I'd make knives like I make them today. It was the least in my worry. Now I want to mention this. Me and my brother did it together, and he was actually really good at making knives, and he was really, really interested in it, where I was interested in it, but not as much as he is. And I try to get him down there and say, hey, come on, make a knife. But he's not interested in it where he was when he was younger versus where I wasn't as much interested in it. So, life's funny. But hopefully whoever comes and buys my stuff when I'm gone, if it gets sold, my family gets a decent wage out of it, and they're happy. That's all that matters to me,
Absolutely. So, Matt, tell us a little bit. I know that you do some ministry work and have a show or a radio show that you do. Can I talk a little bit about that? I mean, I think that would be good to fill out the rest of this interview with, and you can talk a little bit about how you share the word and kind of what that looks like.
Okay. I do have a radio ministry. There's a station not too far from me. I go to every Sunday. I'm on from 9:30 to 10 a.m. I got a 30-minute window there. It's FM and AM, and also you can listen on the internet. But I've recently, back in 2012, as most people, before then I kind of lived a little wild, and I ended up going to church, and I ended up realizing, that I did have a Lord and Savior that loved me and died for me. I ended up getting saved back in 2012, and went on for about a year, and I felt like God was calling me to preach. And I never was a book smart person, never read a lot of books, but the Bible, I can honestly say that's something that I've read, and I've really committed myself to reading, and it was something I struggled with, because if anything I do, I'm all hands on. It's all in, or I'm not going to do it all. And I told the Lord, I said, Lord, if this is something you really want me to do, help show me, make this clear. And there was a process, and I started. I had a guy I went to church with, was a good friend of mine. He's passed away now, and but he kept inviting me to go to the radio station, and I kept telling him no. And probably about 9 months, I'd tell him no, and he ended up. He was steadfast, and he stayed at me, and he ended up getting me down there, and it was probably one of the best things for me. I loved every minute of it, and I ended up preaching there, and I said, all right, well, Lord, maybe this is where you want me to start, because I was open for anything. It didn't matter to me. I didn't have to have a great audience or nothing like that. If I spend my whole life and one soul gets saved, it's worth every bit of it, because the Lord died for me and he forgave me my sins. So just winning one's worth it. So I was on the radio with him for about 2 years, and I had a call. Somebody asked me to come and help out at a church, and I went over there, and I filled in there for a good while, and they kept asking me to pastor the church, and I told them, I didn't know. I was young and still learning a lot, and I ended up pastoring that church for about 8 years. Yeah, 8 years. And there come a point where I felt like, the Lord was through with me there. It was time for me to move on. And it was weighing on me real heavy to go back to the radio. And my friend had passed away and gone to be with the Lord. And I called his wife and told him that I was going to start his ministry back. What she thought about it, I asked her. And she said she'd be glad to do that. So I started back in the Name of Jesus Ministries, which was under Doug Snipes. He originated that ministry. And so to this day, that's what I do now. I go to the radio every Sunday from 9:30 to 10, and I preach the gospel. You know, and I've met a lot of people, and that I don't go around telling somebody that I'm a preacher. You know, my life should speak volume versus my mouth. But there comes times to where some people will change who they are. You know, I can sit down with somebody and, you know, their language is totally different than mine. But, you know, I'm not the type of person to bash somebody. And, you know, I would rather get to know them and show them I care. And, you know, then when the Lord gives time to talk to them, you know, there's a way about going and being a witness for the Lord. So I guess what I'm saying is there's maybe a lot of people that don't even know I'm a preacher. Because I don't go and tell them. A lot of times people introduce yourself, I'm Reverend so-and-so, or this, a Dr. so-and-so, or whatever, but that's not the case here for me. You know, I don't look at it as that or as a title. I look at it as it's a calling. It's a gift from God that he's given to me.
Well, Matt, it was really great to have you on the podcast and talk about knives, your life, and your relationship with the Lord and everything. So I just want to thank you for your time. And if you can give us the links to your ministry, your radio station and everything, we'll post that up along with all of your social media links and everything. So that way people can find you and listen in to you on Sunday when you preach.
Yes, sir. Most definitely. And I appreciate y'all having me on too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
This is another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. We thank you guys for listening and sharing your time with us today. Just remember that you are loved and God bless.